But Dada's tired. Dada's tired. That's how Mike
So
talks to us.
tired.
He's our daddy.
I definitely say that to my cat when
Okay.
he's bugging me. God, Dada needs some space.
All right. All right. Are you guys ready to
You have
record a
no
show?
sympathy for me. You went to Montreal last weekend, and then this weekend you have the whole house to yourself. You can kiss my
Whatever.
ass.
When you start doing childcare for full days,
All right.
One,
solo,
Save it for the show.
one
Keep it
day
in
a
your
week.
pants for 2 more minutes. All right.
2 days a week.
We are recording episode 147 of the Good, Bad, or Bullshit podcast imminently. In fact, we are doing it. Crofton, you ready for the countdown?
Yes.
In 5, 4.
Hello and welcome to the Good, Bad, or Bullshit podcast. My name is Crofton Steers. I am the Kermit the Frog of this podcast. With me are my two co-hosts. First off, please welcome my Miss Piggy. I'm talking about Mike Hodgins. How are you, Mike?
Hey, Kermie.
That's pretty good.
It's kind of our it actually is a good relationship dynamic of like weird sexual tension between us and argumentativeness.
And domestic violence from you to me.
Yeah, but that's always
Hi.
yeah, I'm trained in the martial arts.
Speaking of people trained in the martial arts, please welcome the Fozzie Bear of this podcast, Bo Schwartz.
Hey guys, how's it going? What does Fozzie Bear sound like? Hello, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm Fozzie.
That's a good choice. I was
Hello.
also wondering if Animal was gonna be Bo.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of options. If I could have made Mike, Bo Statler, and Waldorf, I would have done so, but I felt that was
Are those the
cheating.
old men?
Yeah, on the balcony.
What
This
are they-
show sucks.
How is Mike not one of those two people?
What are they?
How are you both? Not 10 minutes ago, I said, did you guys check out the Rogue One trailer? Mike went, meh, and then Crofton was like, yeah, that's exactly what I felt. Like, you guys are clearly
Hold on,
Statler and
stop.
Waldorf.
What are their names? I never knew those guys' names.
Statler and Waldorf.
Statler. Waldorf.
Yeah.
It's a great salad.
Those were those characters that, like, when you're a kid, that you're just like, oh, those guys are kind of annoying, but as an adult, they're increasingly
Yeah,
hilarious.
they're like almost the best. They just shit on everything.
Mike's like my idols. Yeah, no, they inspired a large part of the show. So good on them. How are you gentlemen doing?
It's been a rough week. I've got the old stress shoulder, so when I get in a place of stress, my shoulder starts to like act up and get all tight and painful. So it's like there's a knot in my shoulder. But things are now smoothing back out. So stress shoulder slowly ebbing away. But otherwise, I'm good. I'm ready to do a show.
All I'll say is a counter to that is don't ever have children. Because when I think of all the worst weeks of my life pre-children, they all seem like paradise compared to my worst weeks since children.
So do you have a stress shoulder? Like an equivalent for you? Is it like
I don't know. I have
do you have stress
body.
gonads?
Like I'm tired today. I was like it was caregiver styles today. I was talking about this last week, but man, it drains me. I'm not cut out to be a parent. They should have, people say there should be like a license to have a kid. I'm like, yeah, and I should have been denied it. I'm like, you do not have the energy and stamina for a child, Mr. Hodgins.
Wait a second, Mike. Like what? How? Maybe you could use a 360 review of how your parenting is going, because like I'm sure it's tiring, but you make it sound really tiring, and I'm just wondering if like you guys are jogging on treadmills.
It's
how
this
are you?
dual thing of like I love my son so much. He's opened up my eyes to a sense of like love and meaning in life that I didn't even know existed before having a child. Wonderful stuff. And drains the hell out of me when I'm solo with him for like a whole day. I just am like,
don't you like sit in front of Netflix and just like go
no,
do your own
I'm
stuff?
not that kind of father. I try to take him. I just have sometimes they fit the stereotypical incompetent dad. Like I always try to do something and fail. Like today, I'm like, okay, we're gonna go to the pool. I check the schedule. I go to the pool. There's no swim time because I checked the wrong day because I'm an idiot. And I was like, oh, okay, damn it. Let's go to another pool. I know it has times. We go there. It's closed for maintenance. And then they're like, try this other pool, which is way across town. And I went there, and it was like the whole thing was a big fiasco that threw my whole day off.
No.
And I just wanted to go to the pool, and I couldn't even accomplish that. But if I didn't have a child, it would have been easy. Or I would have said, who cares? I'll go to a coffee shop and chill out.
Yeah. I'm sorry. The world's smallest violin is playing on my shoulder for you. I just feel like you got it pretty sweet. like, Mike took, for those who are unaware, took last weekend off with his wife, spent the entire weekend in Montreal, sipping cappuccinos and sleeping in a luxurious hotel. And then next weekend, he has the entire house to himself as his wife and child go exploring another city.
Pretty nice.
So yeah, it seems pretty sweet. So we just caught him on his bad day. Look, before I shit on Mike further, and we'll pull a random topic that will allow me to, I'm sure. I wanted to. There's something that came up this week. I wanted to draw your attention to, both of you. It's called Loki's Wager. Have you ever heard of this?
It sounds vaguely familiar, but no, you'd have to
Okay,
enlighten me.
all right. So it's a logical fallacy is essentially what it is, and the reason I thought it was interesting because I was looking up at the time. I was looking up this other logical fallacy called "No True Scotsman," which is a story for another time. But it led to, as Wikipedia trips do, it leads to this Loki's Wagers thing. Essentially, what it is the Loki, the god of trickery, is told that he must get his head chopped off. And then he said, "Okay, well then you can chop off my head, but you cannot take any part of my neck." And so they got into then they get into this thing about what's the head and what's the neck, and they spend all the time trying to define it, and in the end, like he essentially gets away with it because they could not agree where one ended and the other began, sort of deal.
It sounds like the Merchant of Venice and the Pound of Flesh, but not a drop of blood. Wasn't that the final thing in that?
Yes, right. Yeah. No, it's true. That's a good analogy.
Shylock's like, sweet, I win. What? Not a drop of blood? Ooh, cruel
But
face.
what it made me think of was a lot of our discussions, and often I'm the one that's like, or we'll spend a sizable amount of time defining something. We'll pull a topic and we'll like, what does this mean? Well, does it mean this or does it mean that? And then in the definition, we sort of cop out sometimes of giving an accurate verdict. I can't think of a precise example, but I know that I have done it personally before, where I've just spent so much time locked in the definition or the defining to get out of giving it what probably I should have given it as a verdict.
It's
So
interesting that you bring this up because I have something that's quite similar that I was been thinking about a lot lately, and I'd known about this concept. Have you guys heard of this concept of a wicked problem?
A wicked problem?
sounds like a Boston problem.
Yeah, it was coined in
That's a
Boston.
wicked problem.
Yeah, it's true. It was actually did come from Boston. Some academics around there, and essentially, I think that what you touch on and why sometimes it is hard with a lot of the topics we discuss is a lot of them are things. And so, a wicked problem, just like very briefly, is a problem that is super complex. Like for example, climate change is a wicked problem. Where you start thinking about it, and it's related to culture stuff, it's related to economics, it's related to science, it's got its tendrils and everything. And the reality is there are no like solutions to these wicked problems. And it's things like poverty, it's things like racism and colonialism. These are all wicked problems. They're everywhere, and they don't really have solutions, and they're super hard to define. And I think that a lot of times we get topics that are kind of like that, and it's like all you can do is talk about them. And I had listened to a podcast about them recently, and they were like, "You can never solve wicked problems. You can only hopefully make them better, not worse." Was kind of the takeaway I received. There's like, that's anyways, and a
Well,
lot
at
of the
least
things we do talk about are like that.
you make them better at least by discussing them and picking the
Absolutely,
parts
it's
of
where
it
you start.
that you do know, because understanding them is wicked hard.
Yeah, I know that was really smart what you were saying there, but the whole time I just kept hearing it in a Boston accent. It was a wicked pisser.
All right, maybe
All right.
we'll get a wicked topic today when we get
Oh, 10 on 10 for that segue dive. Nice one there. The judges like it. Crofton, do you have a
the judges. They're like, could have been better.
I'm a Segway judge. I've been a Segway judge for 30 years. I don't
Sattler
work
and
unless you
Waldorf.
pay me $10 and give me a Waldorf salad.
All right, just start the random topic generator.
You're giving her today. She's real loud.
Uh, okay. The topic today is public art.
Public art.
So
So not art, but art in the public.
no,
So
no, no. Okay, what it is, it's basically publicly funded art. So okay, there's very simply you could say, and some artists might hold this view that you make art and then you exhibit and hopefully you sell some. Period, right? But there's a whole big thing like in Canada we have say the Canada Council for the Arts. In a lot of municipalities, when they get a new project going, they'll put out tenders for an art for a park, a sculpture, or something. You see a lot of sculptures. That's public art funded by the
oh,
public.
I
And
see.
some people would say like that's BS, and other people would say, hey, it's wonderful. We should have publicly funded
All
art.
right. Let me start somewhere. Can we just pick a place to start? I think that art is probably a compulsion. There's a compulsion to create art. So, the fact that you have that compulsion to create art means that it's what does I feel like the starting point is that it doesn't matter where the money or the ability to find time or get the tools to do the particular art comes from because the artist has the compulsion to create art. Is that a place that we can start with this?
I mean, yeah, this thing has got. It's just like I think in the end, it's kind of like a lot of people make art and uh, are dirt poor, and then and can't maybe sell their art, or they're making a kind of art that isn't marketable or doesn't have a consumer demand, so they make no money, and then maybe eventually they give up on their art. There's a lot of
So
artists, it's a starving artist
yeah,
is like a thing.
like one thing that blew my mind, and I know Crofton wants to get an opportunity to chime in here. Crofton, you're up next. But one thing that blew my mind is I took some English class, the Romantics, that I definitely failed, um, where we had to read William Blake poems. And I'm like, oh man, all these writers, they probably struggled, but they received success. I think if I memory serves, William Blake was pretty much broke, homeless person his whole life, and then posthumously, his works are lauded and studied, and I'm reading it now in university like he's this awesome thing, and I'm like, this guy saw nothing for his work. And I
It
thought
goes.
that
There's
it's so
both sides. That
strange, and
story is
that's
common.
not uncommon, I guess. But at the
No, not
time, at my
uncommon.
age,
And
it blew my
there's
mind that this
and there's people
person.
like Michelangelo who are famous and had a patron for their entire lives, and they were able to do all these great works of art because someone essentially was like, "Yeah, I'm going to support you." That's a rich person. When some people say that's still how art should be funded by the people who can afford to buy it, and they should, and it shouldn't be publicly funded. Crofton, please.
Uh, so if I'm going to start somewhere on this, it's like we go back to talking about stuff like taxation, right? Which we did on this show, and people's political views and where they stand with regards to art and where they stand with regards to taxes. Reason is public art is paid for with tax money. And so like your money that would go to that you may be okay with going to snow clearing. I live in Canada, or sewers or infrastructure or whatever. You you might not be as okay with it going to something that is less tangible. Like you there's some practicality associated to some of the art, but like in many cases it may just be something to look at or something to appreciate. And I just want to give a sort of little funny example here. So Mike Bow and I live in Ottawa, which is capital of Canada, and there's lots of art projects done by both the national, the local, and the municipal government in the city. And one of them was there's this park, Jack Purcell Park. Um, uh, it was named after a hockey volunteer, a longtime Ottawa hockey volunteer. But there's also a famous Jack Purcell in Canada. It was a national world champion of badminton, and essentially, art was commissioned for Jack Purcell Park, which was a series of like essentially giant badminton rackets all surrounding the park. But that park wasn't named after the Jack Purcell, the badminton star. It was named after Jack Purcell, the Ottawa Volunteer. And so essentially, people were, kind of up in arms. The Jack Purcell, who it was supposed to be in tribute of, said, "Oh, it's an honest mistake. I don't care," because he's a nice guy. Obviously, volunteers. But like, it goes to show that like you're already on a fine line when spending taxpayer money on art. And so you have to be sure you get it right. And it's hard to get it right with art because everybody has a different perception. I don't know much about art, but I know what I like, and what some person likes, the other person might not like. What somebody thinks is a good spending of their tax money, another person might think is a horrible waste.
It's pretty interesting, and I think that's like kind of in some ways the nail on the head of this topic is the subjective value of art. I can think of so many pieces of art that some people are like, I love that thing, and other people are like, I hate that thing. And it could be any piece of art. So I guess the thing being that like if you're gonna buy art, you buy the art you like, and you don't buy the art you don't like. But once it's taxpayers, then it's like you might be subject to art which you dislike and know that you paid some share of. And also, so a couple things sort of related to that is in who decides what art is public art? Some committee, like what gives them, some committee of like provincial, federal, or and they might consult some public, but like why do they decide like this art is more valuable than that art? Because again, it's so subjective. So someone, you might have an artist that puts something else forward, and they're like, the committee doesn't like what they have, so it doesn't go through. Someone else's does. Like, who's to say? I mean, it's so subjective. It's almost like there's no right way to choose the project. But at the same time, and this is the other thing about art, is that art shouldn't be, it's not like pop culture, it shouldn't be and this is like idealistic, art shouldn't be like what people like. That's what pop culture is there for. Art should be what challenges you. You might make you uncomfortable. You might hate it, and that's what it might evoke. And art is supposed to push boundaries, try new things. And if it was only driven by demand, then you'd end up with pop culture again. And maybe by having something like publicly funded art, you're going to get things which are more provocative, which you don't like, evoke a negative reaction, and that's part of what art's supposed to do, I think.
So where does because the publicly funded part of all this makes me feel like what we're essentially saying is we're bringing art to life that would not otherwise have a patron in terms of an individual or a company or something. Like it's for, and I'm thinking of Canada here, it's for this because we're Canadians. It's hard to get away from the fact that there is a lot of outside influence from the world in the kinds of things that we consume, the art that we consume. And maybe I'm thinking more pop art than actual artist stuff, but there is very much this idea that we want to make sure that there is Canadian art and culture out there, which is where the idea of the public funding comes from, I think. And one side of the coin would be like, well, we'd have culture if we'd have culture. So don't try and force it. And I feel like, and I have this bias that all Canadian like publicly funded art is fucking crappy. Like it's just self-indulgent and overly, it's self-indulgent and overly filled with meaning and all of this kind of stuff. Very what's the word I'm looking for?
So you're saying if you went to like Chicago or something and looked at their public art, it would automatically be better because it's American public art?
I haven't given that much thought. I'm looking at just the Canadian thing. When I see like National Film Board on a movie, I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna watch this. It's gonna be terrible. I don't want to watch a National Film Board movie.
I actually wasn't thinking about stuff like that. I'm not sure. Is that when we say public art, we're talking about stuff like National Film Board stuff too?
Yeah, I think grants, like it goes for writers too. A lot of writers who publish could not get anywhere near making a living off selling their published work. They usually get buying grants, and still do not make a lot of money. They a lot of these artists who get by, and that's because of public funding. So yes, I think it does include that.
Because I was gonna say, like, getting back to the statues and stuff, like, I made it sound like the only way those things get done is through taxation, but where in many cases, especially around here, you'll see like a developer wants to build a building and the city will be like, all right, you can build this building here, but you have to add value, artistic value, cultural value to the area, and then they may work with the city to commission an art piece that comes out of their coffers and not necessarily public funds. So I guess maybe it was inaccurate to say it's always tax dollars, but I definitely did not think about stuff like the National Film Board, which is a good point. We have more of that in Canada, I think, than they do say in the States. Although I would venture to say in Europe, there's probably a lot of support to the arts. It's kind of tough because you get romantic visions, if you will, of these things where you think, if there was nobody, if there's nobody buying this art and people are making it and it's challenging and it has worth and all this sort of stuff, but they're not able to afford to make it, and the state is able to allow for prominent display or distribution of their art, is there value in it? And if there is it enough value to make up for the fact that you're spending taxpayers' money? And that's the tricky part. And it again comes back to all art being like, I might see something and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that this exists. I'm so happy. I enjoyed this so much, and it never would have existed without support from the government. And you do see like the government support is sometimes co-sponsorship of film and stuff. You'll see the logo of Canada on different things, even though that they're not fully sponsoring it. And I can't think of a ton of things off the top of my head, but there's some things that have definitely permeated the fabric of Canada in terms of arts and culture and funded by the government. And there's you see merit to it in retrospect because those were successes. Those echoed with a lot of people. But I just wonder, like, if the government might give the example of these things that people might hate. The government sponsors a statue that like 90% of people are either unmoved or uninterested in, or maybe even dislike. Was that a mistake? And if so, like, should they be even in that business?
Well, like I feel like the end result shouldn't be, like it's art. Like I feel like what's important is that the people who are pursuing their journey of creating art are allowed to do so. Like as someone who works and during the week, I can only pursue my art of podcasting during certain times. But having the funds to enable me to do other projects, to do other things, would be something that maybe the stuff I made would really suck, but I'm being supported. And so I'm part of the institution of artists in Canadian culture, or the culture of whatever country, where the idea being that we have a stable of people out there creating the culture. So I guess I just wanted to say that bit to what you had to say, which was like
grants or something else too. I didn't really think about in that way, and it's funny how it's a rabbit hole.
Well,
but like
there's like investing, and then there's grants, right? Like sometimes people invest in art projects, and sometimes people just give the money for free.
Well, like investment in art would be a private investment, like you manage to get a sponsor or a supporter, and that's essentially what things like Patreon, follow us and follow us on Patreon and give us money. That's what those things are for, or to be a patron. Whereas in the case of public funds, it's the government acting as patron for a select amount of artists if they meet a certain amount of criteria, right?
But it's so I guess a couple of things that are, so art is, might be, you might not like it, whatever. A lot of it though is just beautiful and does make something more beautiful. So a pretty recent example very near me is a parking garage that went up about a half a block from my house. It's a parking garage, right? About the most boring structure you can think of. And so the
Agreed.
city, I guess, when they put out the thing, they wanted to have a public art element. So I don't know what the process was. I don't know anything, but it has some public art in it, and it makes that parking garage way better than it would otherwise be. It's just concrete. So and it's got like 3 levels or something, and the area the parking garage in, there's like a canal nearby and this like lake called Dow's Lake and blah blah blah. So each level of the parking garage reflects these areas and has different things. So like the bottom level has fish. There's all these fish on different like on all the concrete pillars, and you go up another level, and then there's like frogs and like what do you call salamanders and stuff, and you go up another level, and there's like squirrels and woodland creatures, and you go to the top level, and there's all these birds. There's like a blue heron and a, all in just in concrete, just kind of either some of them are chiseled in a very small thing. I don't know what it costs. I'm sure enough, but it's a parking garage, like the crappiest looking structure. But you walk through and you're like, this is actually kind of nice. Like, and so when I'm meandering around with my son, we go in it, and he'll be like, "Oh, a squirrel!" And there's, it's not like it's not necessarily provocative in the sense that it draws something out of me that some types of art might, but it's certainly beautiful, and it turns something which would otherwise be a really mundane structure into something which is actually nice to walk through. And there's some color in it, and there's some sculptures of fish sort of on the main level as you go in. So that's sort of one point. It can just make things which are drab, and a lot of our like infrastructure stuff is drab, beautiful, and that's no one's really going to crap on that. If you, but another thing I want to mention is that a lot of art. So we got into things like grants, and if you're a writer, or even if you were to consider this art podcasting, as we mentioned the other day, low bar of entry, right? Like if you write, even if you don't write well, you can still write, and maybe you can get it published, or you could self-publish. It's going to cost you a bit of money. I have a friend who is a bronze artist, and she makes a living at it. And I think that most of her income comes through public. She'll win a public art funded thing. Bronze is expensive. Like for her to make a piece, it costs thousands of dollars. So as much like, you're saying, the artist is compelled, and it's like if you can't, but say you're making
she
art
needs
that,
to be enabled, like, because she can't. What is she gonna do? Work at McDonald's to get money for bronze?
Like you'd have to be working all the time. Think about it, paying all your bills, paying all your overhead, and then to spend tens of thousands of dollars making bronze sculptures because it's your passion. I mean, maybe that would happen. And she does sell.
How do you get into bronze making if you don't have money to begin with?
And
School?
making what?
School?
How do you get into bronze sculpting?
School, yeah. She went to art school and was into sculpture, and then got into bronze. There's not a lot of women working in bronze, so it was a place to. She makes beautiful stuff, and it does actually sell.
I think if I'm going to be cynical here and put the big thing is people will say, like, look, if you're making something and people are not willing to purchase it, or you're not able to make money on it, then what is the worth of it? And to use a pro wrestling parlance, in pro wrestling, you get booed, you get cheered. The worst possible thing that can happen is nobody makes any noise. Nobody cares. And so if nobody cares about your art, then why should the government? Like, technically, you should be eliciting, your art should be, no matter what it is, be it written, audiovisual, sculpting, it should be eliciting a reaction from people, and they should be wanting to engage with it. And you could argue like and I could easily argue about being a podcaster and how it's difficult to promote and difficult to get known and to rise above all these other podcasters, or to rise above all these other artists and get noticed. But is it the government's job to cherry pick artists and be like, okay, you are going to get recognized, or you are going to get elevated, or you are going to get funded, and that sort of thing, if you can't do it yourself? Like, if you can't successfully do it yourself.
So the thing about that that's interesting is that each one of us, we've seen a lot of bronze work. You have. If you walk around like Parliament Hill, downtown, in most cities, you'll see a statue of someone in bronze. How is someone like, so if you can't make a living, if you can't devote your life to something like sculpture and a medium like bronze, to be able to do something like a statue of the Queen, or something like that, which may be a kind of a mundane thing. That's still art. We see it all over the place. But like, what are you going to say? Like someone, at art, like, we'll give you money to do, this portrait of a important person. The rest of the time, you're on your own. And the issue with that being that a lot of times, like we might go by and see a piece of bronze art that we think is interesting, but do you have $20,000 to buy it? And or would you buy it? So even if you liked it, you might be like, I like this. I wouldn't buy it. I like it. And then even if
Probably you
I
gotta
really like it, I
pay
wish
up
I owned it.
front.
I don't have $20,000 because it costs. A big piece of art is going to cost you tens of thousands in bronze just in material. And then if you start adding up the labor to make something like a fine sculpture, it's so many hours. Like these people are not making good living at art. Their hourly wage is probably much less than any one of us, and we're all working in publicly funded jobs at the moment. So it's one of those things where it's like we want there to be art, and you quoted wrestling. There's this other famous quote by Winston Churchill for a very counter. During the Second World War, people wanted to cut. This is like a famous thing. Wanted to cut arts funding in Britain for the war effort, and his response was something like, "If we don't have art, what are we fighting for?" And it's this kind of thing that like art is part of humanity. It's part of culture. It's ingrained, and you can't just let all your artists be street people who are trying to like scratch a living.
But do you think that that's honestly the case? It should flourish on its own if it is so. And see, you're using these examples of giant bronze statues, but there can be lots of little bronze statues that could be sold to people, as opposed to like and Bo was talking about the film board, and like the film board or the CBC and how they sponsor television shows with Canadian content and all that sort of stuff as sort of cultural protection. I mean, like that's all stuff that you could argue, well, you know what? There's plenty of people that can make audio video content, and if it's not good enough for people to want to pay to see it, then why should we be funding it?
A friend of ours who sometimes listens to the show, Marc Andre, who plays on our frisbee team, was telling me he was reading a book that was called "Buy an Artist a Beer" or something like that. And the basic point of the book was that most artists don't like barely make ends meet.
Right.
And this is even with getting some public funding, right? Because you might get a contract 1 year, you might not get another one for 5 years, and that might pay. That's like gives you a decent wage for 1 year, and now you're trying to sell your art again. They mostly don't make good money. But art is this intangible thing, and it's not mass production, right? So like if you want to make money in business, you mass produce something, you sell it to a bunch of people. Art, you could do prints of paintings, say, but like, if you're nobody, how many are you really going to sell?
A movie, a video game, all the stuff that we consume is art and
culture.
No, you can't draw a line on that. Pop art is like film and art. Like be like, this movie that has no artistic merit. This one has artistic merit.
Yes, but Crofton, you must be aware of the term. Like when people say fine art, it's not to say it's better. That's not what it's about. It's not like it's better than pop culture. Pop culture is art. Yes, absolutely.
Pop art.
Sure. Pop art, which has a consumer appeal, and that's great. And then it has its place. I'm not saying we shouldn't have that. But there's other kinds of art that are avant-garde or go counter to culture, have a particularly anti-consumeristic view. People might hate it, and you see like that's still driving stuff forward, and that's important. And a lot of artists doing one-off pieces, like you don't make any money, and it's just like, so to expect these people to devote their lives to them, like we hear but a few that make it, and it's great for them, but it's basically like winning the lottery or becoming a pro athlete. It's one of those things where most of them toil in obscurity, like Bo was talking about, people like William Blake or Van Gogh. There's any number that never even made it to prominence after their death. To work on this stuff, they mostly live hand to mouth. And I have a friend who I went to high school with who's a poet, and she I saw her mom a few years ago, and she works as a poet. She published, but no one buys poetry. And I think she gets grants, and her mom had been like, oh, she's such a hard go. But she's devoted to it, and that's great. But she lives below the poverty line to do art. And I think the idea of public funding would be like, let's just give these people a bit of a helping hand. They're not living the high life, and they're giving us art.
But yeah, I and I'm playing devil's advocate a bit here, but I still like going back to Bo's point from the beginning, people who do art, who are into art, are doing it. They're not doing it necessarily for all of us. Like, and maybe some of them are, but for the most part, they're doing it for themselves. They are interested in making art. This is what they want to do in their free time. And in many cases, some of the art that they make could be very challenging, could be appreciated by generations in the future, but really could nobody could really be into it or whatever. And it's just, it's just for them. So essentially, one group in society is being given money, opportunity, whatever from the government for doing things that they would be doing anyway, or enjoying things that they, and it's like, oh, they're living below the poverty line. I get that sort of stuff, but it's like they could work a job and do art in the evening or
Actually,
whatever.
hang on.
Like
I want
I'm
to say
just
something
talking.
once you finish your thought. That's why.
Yeah. So they could do these things, and yes, it would be more advantageous for them to have more time to do art. But it's choosing a class of people, saying that what they're producing is of value, and engaging it and measuring it in a certain way, and then giving public funds to those people. And I can see it just being a very contentious issue for some people.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points, because it's funny how much I undersell myself, because we do the podcast here.
Me too.
And it's an act of creation, but I would never call there's maybe an art to podcasting, but I don't consider this the creation of art, even though we're delivering a product.
I would call it a craft.
Sure, like we can call it something. There's creation and there's energy involved, and we're doing a thing in our spare time just because we feel like it. Lord knows we have less listeners than we do have episodes of the show, probably. But
What?
we still have lots of listeners. But we do this because we have a passion for it, and if thousands and tens of thousands start listening to this program, we'll be very happy to do it just as much as if the current small niche coffee shop amount that do listen to it. We love you guys. Now, but there is one thing I do that when I was saying I was underselling it is crazy. Like, I've actually made some music that gets used. The song in this show, I made it. I'm like, I guess that's art, right? I played some music and made it. I made a thing.
It's art.
And I've done this for a couple of projects now. And I did get some individuals on another project I did who reached out to me and said, "Oh, can you do music for my show?" And I didn't feel like it. I didn't want to, because I'm not engaged at that level where I necessarily, like, it's not a commercial product for me. So there isn't I'm not looking at it from an industry point of view. However, if I could be supported to create the things that I did want to do with regards to that, I would feel better about it. And like, I'm working on a project right now, and I'm actually finding it difficult to I don't have kids. I barely have an excuse, but I'm finding it difficult to find time where I'm in that zone, that good creative zone, working this job. Like, I come home and I'm like, I have every intention of starting to work on the track that I'm working on. And I'm like, I'm tired. Like, I'm I don't feel like I'm in that place. It's not that I'm so tired. It's just I'm not in that good space. And what money for artists does enable is just they can wake up in the morning, they can go to the coffee shop and debate about politics for an hour or two, or drink beer, or do their drug of choice, and then get
So
in their
they
zone
get to live
and do
the
it.
high life.
It's not the high life, but they get to do the thing that they want to do. And here's, you bring up a good point, because I think it's not an uncommon view of people who don't work for work for a living. I think the thing is that you have to make choices in life. Like, you get to a point where you're going to say, I'm going to have a home and I'm going to be well taken care of, and that's going to be my priority. Or you make the other choice. I think a lot of people who make the other choice are they're not understood by the people that make the other choice. They're severely misunderstood by the people who make that other choice to prioritize things, almost to the point of being called lazy and somewhat vilified as lazy folks. But that's a choice that they make to prioritize the thing they want to do over what would be traditional values of, say, well, I have to save money to buy a house and get in my car and all these other priorities before I get to the art, where the artist says those things tax my ability to do the thing I do, so they're not my priority.
Well,
And that's why we need the funding, because they're making that tough choice, and somebody's got to, if we want that culture, if we want that inner culture, somewhere publicly we have to come together and say we need a way for those people who do create to at least not starve.
well, and don't pretend like these people who they're doing art all across the board are just like showing up, like they graduate from art school and it's like, time for some money. Give me money, government, for art projects. Like they're doing art. They spend years doing this stuff for free. Like you don't just wake up one morning and you have great talent. You have to work at it. And I've mentioned before that I've like and I consider myself a writer, though I haven't actively written in a long time. And I spent probably a couple years of my life working minimally so that I could write stuff. But here's the thing, like I was young, and I wrote a few novels and some screenplays and things like that. And the reality was they were all pretty shitty, and because it takes a long time to get good at something like that. But I was tired of being broke ass all the time, and that's how I felt. Now I'm not crying, and nor would any of the things I had done been worthy of public funding. Like if I had submitted and tried to get a grant, I'm sure I wouldn't have got one, and I wasn't probably deserving of it. But a lot of people put in a ton of time to get to the point where they have the talent and they have the drive that they're getting public funding from stuff like that. And I gave up, as so many do. And like Bo, I still think about it every day almost. I'm like, oh, I need to get better. I have ideas, but I'm just like, and I'm not even working that much.
But that's all you're saying. All you guys are saying is like, we really like to do this stuff, and we want somebody to give us money. It's really what it comes down to.
Not even. It's just that I think what you're not realizing is that the people who do end up making it have spent many years sacrificing, and sometimes all they had to get them through maybe was like an arts grant to give them an extra year to help hone their craft till they got that. Like probably a lot of the books that you've loved or whatever might have been someone who was poor dirtbag writer at some point, and then they honed their craft, they made something good, and then they got commercial success. Some people will never do that, but for every someone who gets there, you need to have a whole bunch of just fail, because that's how it works. And it's like, and most of them, like most people do not get funding, like they work at this stuff, they just give up, and they keep toiling away and they don't make it, whatever. But I just giving a helping hand, and people always say like the arts are underfunded. And it might amount to millions or whatever over our country, but like if you were to compare it to something like subsidies for oil and gas or something, which is free market enterprise thing, you might be like, well, that's BS too.
What's tricky, I think, it goes back to what you said earlier, which is like you're defining art, and you're saying that art has value, and you're saying that therefore we are going to support the people who make art, and all of that makes sense. It just starts to fall apart at the seams when you start having people that then be like, oh, how is this art? This is garbage. I can't believe we we're paying for this. Most people would agree to contribute to something that they think has value. Where I think the point I was trying to make is that artists make art because they're passionate about it. And the problem is people can be passionate about a lot of stuff. Very few people want to work all the time or whatever. They want to maybe do other things, and artists are getting remunerated to do the things that they love, perhaps by the public purse. When Bo's example was talking about somebody asking him to make something, he could perhaps have made a profit on that, in which case it would be like sort of a private transaction. And people who are like harping on public funding and stuff would say like, well, this is it. They have to be able to be self-sufficient. They have to be able to make money. And I made some of those arguments early on. I just think that where it gets tricky, where things just really get tricky is whenever you ascribe some sort of value value to art and choose one artist over another, or even a whole genre or a whole type of art. Say this is art, this is not. We were talking about podcasting. We couldn't even agree. What is it? A craft? Is it art? I don't even know. Like, and I think that that's where the spending of public funds has to be extremely prudent. On the other hand, you don't want really boring art. So if you're too prudent, and think about like you're walking down those halls of a hotel with all the art that they choose, and it's the most generic, boring, does nothing, might as well be wallpaper, does nothing for you. So you need to take risks with art as well. So the whole, the more we talk about this, the whole element of publicly funded art is just, it is much more contentious topic than you would think.
Definitely. And I mean, Andrea's my wife's uncle is an artist, and he's also conservative, so that maybe helpfully. But he's an artist his whole life, and he taught art, and he was a sculptor, and he had a firm view as someone who worked in it. And he was like, I had a job because you can't make a living selling sculptures, and he would sell some, but and he still did it, and that was his firm view. There shouldn't be public funding. If you can't sell your art, then get a job and keep making art. And that's a fair argument in a lot of ways. But again, it comes down, like so many things, is like what how do you see what society would you like to live in? One in which some rich people buy art and display it in their house, and then there's no art anywhere except for people who put it there, like graffiti artists or something. You might not even like it, on their own time and on their own dime, and that's all there is. And or would you like to see some art which you would have never thought you would have liked until you saw it in some park and thought, wow, that's amazing. And occasionally a piece of art where you're like, really, that's publicly funded art, what a piece of crap. Which you're going to have both those reactions. I have both those reactions to public art I see. And I feel like I'd rather have the world in which some artists are commercially successful, some toil in obscurity, still make cool stuff and contribute, and some that get a bit of funding to help us along, and then we all get to see more art than we otherwise would. I think that's a better world. I guess I'm getting towards where I'm going to land.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like a roll up to a verdict.
We're getting close to verdicts here. We're really over time, but I wanted to add one thing, and this is more because I understand Crofton's not trying to be a villain versus the artist. He's trying to be devil's advocate and wrap his brain around the thing. He's doing good work, folks. And I wanted to sort of take a swing by his neck of the woods and say that I think the concern when people get funded is that it creates a sense of, what's the word? Not lethargy, but, if you're a struggling artist and all of a sudden you have some security around the fact that you'll earn income with, making whatever, how do we know you're pushing yourself to perfect the techniques that you're disciplined in? If you're a pianist or if you're a sculptor or whatever, we do, I think, ask some reasonable assurances of the artists that we're giving grants, and I'm not 100% sure if that's true or not. Okay, the product is what the product is. We don't know if we'll like it or not because it's art, and who the hell knows? It's a big experiment. But, we've shown prior work, so how are you pushing yourself? How are you getting better? I think that the view is, well, they're being funded, so what are they fighting for? Basically, when I work, if I'm working in a job, I'm fighting to feed my family. I'm fighting for something. I'm making myself better to earn more money to, again, take care of more things, or whatever it is I'm doing, it's to try and be better. And I think artists are not necessarily driven by these things, first of all. And second of all, they do have a discipline where in most cases, you can be a better actor. You can be a better sculptor. They're practicing, presumably, to be better. But I think when you look at publicly funded stuff, you're like, and I think mainly of films in this regard, it's just like sometimes it's no one's trying to be a better storyteller. They're just trying to be like, oh, I like this shot of the lake. And they like this crappy song. And this is the thing I'm creating, or this weird painting, or this, the word installation art, or whatever. Weird things that are supposed to be full of meaning that are just absolute boring, and the public funded it, and I'm not thinking, why do we pay for this crap? I'm like, why are we enabling this person? This person actually needs to get a job because he's not doing anything useful this time.
That's the exact point, is that Bo's version of something of being not worthwhile or whatever and shouldn't get funded might be different than somebody else's, and then it just it gets really complicated really fast.
So I guess what it means is if you call yourself an artist, the government should just give you money. But
but it's not that. Anyways,
it's so not that.
We should probably get to verdicts.
Okay. All right, let's bring in our panel of expert jurors who, are pretty smart. And they don't sound like they're smart. They are.
Order, I say. Order in the court.
Order in the court, folks. Time to deliver verdicts. And who should go first?
I'll go middle. Michael go first and Bo will go last.
All right. I like the new manager, like a team leader, Crofton, who's starting to take charge, and
he's taken up the mantle of shitting on my verdict after I go, but that's okay.
No, the logic behind it is that I hosted, so my voice can't be last. You're pretty much done your verdict from before. You just have to sort of reheat it, and then Bo has to go last because
Crofton,
of
you should be publicly funded. You're an artist of conversation. Look at this logistic masterpiece.
So it's funny because I know it's like from this conversation, and I do think we've been playing a little bit. Crofton's been playing the devil's advocate. In this case, he's a piece of publicly funded art that you'd be like, oh God, I hate it. But you're glad it's still there because it provides a counterpoint to the nicey, lovey stuff. And I'm the piece of publicly funded art that you're like, oh wow, it's this cool looking shiny thing. I like it. And Bo's the piece you don't notice, I guess.
Hey.
No, that's not true. Bo's also a shiny piece of art. Crofton's just the one that's like a piece of,
you don't.
It's like human shit in a box or something.
That's human shit. Okay, all right.
You think I jest? There is a famous piece of art where a guy canned his own excrement, and that was his art.
Sure, sure.
Art. It comes in all kinds of things.
Okay.
And as much as
jars.
Well, I guess I'll just go and say good. Get it out of the way. I think public art is good. Because that's where I was going to land, and I think from the conversation it seemed clear. But it is, as this conversation has shown, I was much closer on the line to bullshit versus good than I am with a lot of things I give good, because there is such a subjective element to this, and who chooses the art? How's it chosen? What makes that person that person gets some job as a bureaucrat or something in a committee, or there's probably, if any of our listeners know about the process better than we do, maybe it's much more robust than we're giving it credit for. In any case, it's definitely got its problems, but I do think that most artists live a life of sacrifice, to do art, and not everyone is capable of doing great art, and I think that when those people come along, it's good to support them. And there's always going to be people like Van Gogh who or William Blake who just die, and then everyone's like, hey, look at their great stuff. Too bad they live like homeless people and then just died.
We're really getting a lot of value off of their material now. They're
and now it's all worth millions of dollars. Isn't that great? Too bad their life sucked. But it's good to know that there are people I use Michelangelo again, or people that had patronage. And I think that's just a modern equivalent of patronage. It comes from all places. There's still rich people who are patron of the arts. And I think that the state plays a role in providing some patronage for artists too. I think it all has a place, and art enriches the world. Even if we don't like it, probably most of us in the back of our heads would be like, I'm glad it's there. Anyways, I think it's good. I'm glad there's some funding for art. I think there probably should be even a little more, but there you
go. All right.
So it's funny. There's this episode of Doctor Who you guys should watch, where he goes back in time to meet Vincent Van Gogh, and it ends with him taking him into the future to visit a Van Gogh museum or whatever. It's pretty cool how it's put together, actually. And the guy who plays Van Gogh is honestly a real, not only good actor, but looks a lot like him. So to answer Mike's sort of what he was pointing out is true. I was playing devil's advocate here, and honestly, sometimes you feel dirty almost doing it and dishonest. to the listeners. But the reality is that Bo, Mike, and I generally lean the same way politically, and I think this is one of those topics that really will echo in certain ways depending on your political leanings. Mike mentioned that people who are more conservative in the spending of tax dollars would be perhaps less appreciative of their money being spent on art installations or what have you. Um, and I can appreciate that. And honestly, I don't think we have a silver bullet argument to say like money should be spent on arts by the government. I think that it's always going to be debated. How much is spent? It's always going to be up for debate. How many museums are funded? How many, if we have a symphony or if we have whatever. But I think I made a pro wrestling analogy earlier. To make a more mature analogy, if I think of the Civilization video game, there are many different ways that you can win that game, and one of them is an arts and culture victory. And you think about all these empires throughout history, and you think about what you remember the most from these empires, and often it was overspending on arts and culture, giant monuments, busts, sculptures, everything. And I think, of course, there is a balance there, but I think that there is a strong value in art one way or another, however you interpret it. And it's extremely difficult for the government to find that line in funding it. But I think it's a battle worth fighting. And therefore, I'm going to say that public art is good.
Man, I love Civilization 5. Seriously, it's the best. If there's one video game I feel like Mike should play, it's Civilization 5. All right.
It's too arty for me.
It sounds so nerdy. An arts and culture victory.
Yeah, you can
Most
win.
games be like lame. What about a massive bomb on someone's head victory?
Headshot victory.
There's science victory, there's dominance victory, which you just described, and there's a UN victory if you can make the United Nations and form a...
Good luck with that.
No, you can win that way, absolutely.
That one always fails.
It's the diplomatic victory. That game is amazing. But anyways, not to segue. If you like video games, check out our podcast, cxmpodcast.com. But... I'm giving my verdict now on publicly funded art, and I think you guys both brought very good points. I know, as someone who minorly has like a little finger on the idea that I am an artist, saying I am an artist, I like the idea of the public funding me so I don't have to do this stupid freaking job that I'm doing. So I am all in on publicly funded art. Give me the money to do the things that I love to do. Publicly funded art is good. Bias to the max. I'm just gonna go full bias here and say, give me public money to make things, because working is not my jam. I'm sorry, everyone who works. I respect it. I love it. It's not my jam. Let me just make shit and be a weirdo. That's.
I like how you're owning your bias, and I think it's important to do that because. I think all three of us are coming from similar places. So sometimes, when you get into that echo chamber zone, it can get a little risky. So it's good that we're able to self-examine a little bit on the show. Folks, if you want to critically examine us, you can by emailing us at goodbadbull@gmail.com. You can visit goodbadbull.com. All our stuff is there. All our old podcasts, the whole 9 yards. Follow us on Twitter at goodbadbull. You'll get notified whenever a new episode drops. You can also subscribe on Stitcher and iTunes. Like us on Facebook. We always love your likes, your comments. Interact with us. We want to hear from you on any topic. This is a good one, but we've recently done other topics, the United Nations, the Lord of the Rings. If you have stuff you want to tell us, please reach out, email or follow us individually on Twitter, because you can do that. We're individuals of an individual nature. Michael, if people wanted to follow you on Twitter, how would they go about doing that?
If they wanted to, for some reason. At ML Hodgins is where they can find my very far between tweets. The art in my tweets is like jazz. It's the notes you don't play. So the tweets I don't make are the ones you have to be looking for with me.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah, so at ML Hodgins and Bo,
That
if
was.
people want to
I'd like
follow
to point
you,
out that was a radioactive level of pretension right there.
I think that was pretty good. I think that was one of my better.
It was
Twitter.
good. I'm not saying it was. I didn't say it was bad. I just said
Basically,
it
just
was,
give free advertising to Twitter, which is
Yeah,
what people want.
I know. Well, okay. Well, next time, give them your mailing address and
You
tell
can
them to
follow
send you your
Bo
tweet
at-
there.
That'd be awesome.
Print it out, mail it to you, and that way, you know. You can find me at Bo Schwartz, where you can find out all the weird crap I'm up to. It's mostly video game related, so if you like this show but not into video games, it won't appeal to you. But I do EXM Podcast, exmpodcast.com, core at heroesforyou.com, and I will be on Azeroth Roundtable Friday nights, so you can check that out at twitch.tv AzerothRT.
And what's great
I'm all over
is
the
he's-
internets.
he's limited to 130 characters. And you can follow me at Crofted Steers. Get it? Because you're long-winded?
Yes.
But it's
Get it?
that.
That's the
Yeah.
joke.
Saying that,
Me,
this is
I'm,
like a
I'm very
club.
succinct.
This is like a club of long-winded people
It's
here.
like opposite day. It's true.
None of us should be
It's
on
true.
Twitter.
There's
We
a lot
should
of
all-
wind in this show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. At the same point, that's why we're doing the show. This is our art, gentlemen. We have to share ourselves with the
It is.
world.
That's
And
true.
just like a lot of publicly funded art, nobody likes it, but it's still good.
We're not publicly funded.
I know
I-
we're not
yeah,
public. Maybe
yeah.
we should look into some grants.
We have a patron. That's my mom.
Bo's
My
mom, who we appreciate.
Heinelka Joni, my mother, is our patron. She provides us with $4 a month on Patreon.com.
It is generous of her.
And it's generous support. And
Like you can too.
And you guys could be a part of it too for just $1 a month. We would love it. And all it would really serve for us, even the small amount, would be to pay for our domain costs and help make the show happen. Help us make
Just
it
think,
happen.
when you have that choice of a dollar, it's like $1 a day to feed a child in Africa, or you could support this podcast, which we do anyways. The choice is clear.
Do both. This is only $1 a month.
Oh, a month. Oh, okay, there you go, yeah.
Do both. You have money to
Yeah,
do
let
both.
the kids starve.
And if you don't, it's okay too. You're welcome to listen. It's free to the world. But that's what being a patron of the arts is all about. The guy
But if
who was
you're listening
Shakespeare's
was okay.
patron wasn't like, I'm the only one that's going to be in the audience to watch his plays. No, he said, everyone, come on down and watch this great Shakespeare stuff.
It's funny because we talked about public art, but which was a good way to approach, because like art, it just in itself is kind of a funny topic, because you get into it becomes super complicated when you're like, what is art? Where does it start?
Wait,
where does it end?
you said it
and
wrong.
it's like, oh, is it pop culture? Is it stuff like this show? Is it like, it's like
You said it wrong.
You know what that is?
what the-
That's a wicked question.
Oh! Oh, nice. All right, that's where I'm ending it. I'm just cutting the recording right there.
yeah,
VOD watchers, live stream watchers, thank you for hanging out. It's been a blast from my heart, from Crofton's heart to Mike's heart. Thank you for tuning in. Till next time. See ya.
No talking. See what I did there?